The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the heater fighting off the January chill. Lisa stood in the kitchen, absently sipping her tea as she watched Mark's silhouette through the open doorway to their bedroom. He was home from his 2-week business trip to Tokyo, his suitcase perched on the bed, its contents spilling onto the duvet in a mix of tailored shirts and carefully folded ties. The sight should have been comforting, familiar. But something about the way he moved, deliberate and detached, set her teeth on edge. "You brought back a lot this time," she remarked, trying to mask the unease creeping into her voice. "Just a few souvenirs," Mark replied without looking at her, his tone clipped. "Thought I'd grab some things for the office. You know, the team loves trinkets." She smiled thinly and nodded, though his words felt hollow. It wasn't just the distant way he spoke, it was the subtle changes in him. His face seemed paler, drawn tight around the jawline, and there was a slight tremor in his hands as he unpacked. He'd always been meticulous, but this was different, like he was performing a ritual instead of a chore. Lisa set down her tea and approached the bedroom, feigning interest in his haul. Among the items were the usual suspects: a lacquered bento box, a delicate ceramic tea set, and a few wrapped candies with bright, indecipherable labels. But one object stood out: a carved wooden mask, its face twisted in a grotesque expression somewhere between a grin and a grimace. "Wow," she said, picking it up carefully. "This is something." Mark's head snapped toward her so suddenly that she nearly dropped the mask. His eyes locked on hers, wide and unblinking, before his expression softened into a forced smile. "Traditional Japanese masks," he said, taking it from her hands as if it were fragile. "They're symbolic." "Of what?" "Balance, protection, things like that." He placed it back in the suitcase, closing the lid firmly. "It's nothing important." The air in the room shifted, growing heavier. Lisa felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, like she was being watched. She opened her mouth to press further, but stopped herself. Instead, she stepped back, folding her arms. "Long flight?" she asked, the question an awkward attempt to pierce the tension. Mark sighed, rubbing his temple. "Yeah, I think I'm going to lie down for a bit." "Sure." Lisa lingered in the doorway as he stretched out on the bed, his eyes closed before his head hit the pillow. She glanced at the suitcase again, her curiosity warring with the growing knot in her stomach. Something about that mask. She left the room, shaking her head. Lisa didn't intend to snoop. She really didn't. But later that evening, as she sat at Mark's desk in the den, sorting through a stack of neglected mail, her eyes drifted to his laptop. It sat open, the screen dark, but still humming faintly. She tapped the trackpad to wake it up, intending to shut it down, but froze when his inbox blinked into view. The subject line of the top email read, "The transaction is complete." It was from someone named Kei Yamada. Lisa hesitated, her pulse quickening. She told herself it wasn't her business, that she should close the laptop and walk away, but her hand had already moved to the mouse. The email opened with a single click, its contents both cryptic and unnerving. "The artifact has been delivered as requested. Ensure it is not mishandled. Reverence to the Guardian is paramount. Any deviation will be consequential." Beneath the message was a symbol, a circular design with jagged edges, like a sunburst gone wrong. It looked ancient, almost primal, and yet something about it felt uncomfortably modern, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to reach her. Lisa's chest tightened as she scrolled through the thread. Mark's replies were sparse, his tone curt but deferential. "Understood. The exchange was seamless. Preparations will be made." Preparations for what? Before she could read further, a new email arrived. The subject line chilled her. "To the Chosen Keeper." It was addressed to her. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the sender's name. K. Yamada. The message was short. You are seen. The screen went black. Lisa scrambled to tap the trackpad again, but the laptop was unresponsive. She reached for the power button, her hands trembling. When the screen flickered back to life, the email was gone. So was the entire thread. She leaned back in the chair, her heart pounding in her ears. The room felt colder now, and the faint hum of the laptop seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Mark entered the room, his footsteps startling her. Everything okay? Lisa snapped the laptop shut, forcing a smile. Yeah, just sorting some papers. He nodded but lingered in the doorway, his gaze sharp and searching. You sure? Of course, she said, the words a brittle shield. As Mark walked away, Lisa sat in the heavy silence, her mind racing. Whatever was happening, it was only beginning. The next day dawned gray and listless, a heavy blanket of clouds muffling the sun. Lisa moved through her morning routine mechanically, her mind circling back to the email thread and the cryptic phrase, "You are seen." She had barely slept, the unease coiling tighter with each passing hour. Mark was in the shower when she ventured into the bedroom to tidy up. His suitcase still sat near the closet, a corner slightly unzipped. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. She hadn't intended to go through it. It wasn't like her. But her curiosity had bloomed into something sharper, a need to confirm that what she'd seen wasn't some strange dream. She knelt beside the suitcase and slowly unzipped it. The familiar scent of Mark's cologne and the faint chemical tang of travel wafted up. At first, there was nothing unusual. Folded clothes, a toiletries bag, a few receipts. Then her fingers brushed against something tucked into the side pocket. It was an itinerary, neatly printed on heavy cream-colored paper. The logo of Mark's company was embossed at the top, along with his name. She unfolded it carefully, her brow furrowing as she scanned the details. Several addresses caught her attention immediately. The hotels listed weren't the ones Mark had mentioned during their calls. One address wasn't a hotel at all. It was listed simply as the Garden of Shadowed Tranquility. Another bore no name, only a string of coordinates. Lisa's heart began to race as she flipped through the pages. Tucked between them was a small black and white photograph of a shrine. Its architecture was beautiful, but strange, with a twisted, vine-like design that seemed to grow into itself. In the foreground was a dark obelisk carved with symbols, its edges weathered and rough. She turned the photo over. On the back, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, were the words, "It will not forgive neglect." The sound of the shower shutting off jolted her. Quickly, she folded the itinerary and slipped it back into the pocket, her hands trembling. She rose just as Mark stepped into the room, toweling off his hair. "Hey," he said, his tone neutral but watchful. "Morning," Lisa replied, her voice strained as she busied herself with the laundry. Mark's eyes lingered on her for a moment, and she could feel his gaze, like a weight pressing into her back. "Everything okay?" "Of course," she lied. He nodded, but his expression was unreadable. Lisa excused herself, clutching the basket of clothes tightly as she hurried to the laundry room. The farther she got from the bedroom, the lighter the air seemed, though the unease remained a knot in her chest. Later, as Mark left for an errand, she retrieved her laptop and searched for the shrine. But no results appeared. Not a single mention. Not even the coordinates yielded anything. It was as if the place didn't exist, or didn't want to be found. The storm hit that evening, rain slashing against the windows in relentless sheets. Lisa paced the living room, her nerves fraying with each crack of thunder. Mark had been unusually quiet during dinner, his responses curt and his focus distant. He had excused himself early, retreating to his study. Lisa waited until she was certain he wouldn't come out before she crept upstairs. The door to his study was slightly ajar, a faint glow spilling into the hallway. She held her breath as she peered inside. Mark's desk was littered with papers and open books, their pages filled with dense text and intricate diagrams. But what drew her attention was the notebook lying at the center, its cover worn and scrawled with unfamiliar symbols. Unable to resist, Lisa slipped into the room. She picked up the notebook, its pages brittle under her fingers. The handwriting inside was hurried, almost frantic, interspersed with sketches of the shrine and its obelisk. Symbols identical to those in the photograph appeared repeatedly, surrounding rough translations of what appeared to be Japanese kanji. One phrase stood out, written in bold, shaky letters. "Protect the bridge. Never betray it." Lisa's stomach churned. She flipped through more pages, her dread mounting as she came across diagrams of figures encircling the obelisk. Their features were distorted, their bodies twisted as though drawn in the throes of agony. "What are you doing?" Mark's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. Lisa spun around, clutching the notebook to her chest. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of suspicion and something else, something darker. I was looking for a pen," she stammered, her mind scrambling for an excuse. Mark's eyes flicked to the notebook, then back to her. He took a step forward, his presence filling the small room. "That's private," he said, his tone measured but firm. "You shouldn't have touched it." Lisa handed it to him, her fingers trembling. "I didn't mean to. I just—" "It's fine," Mark interrupted, his voice softening. He placed the notebook on the desk and forced a smile, but his eyes remained hard. "Just stay out of my work, okay?" Lisa nodded, retreating quickly. Once she was back in the bedroom, she closed the door and leaned against it, her chest heaving. The notebook's contents replayed in her mind, each fragment sharpening her fear. She knew now that Mark wasn't just hiding something. He was tangled in something far beyond her understanding, something ancient, something wrong. And whatever it was, she was part of it too. The rain had stopped by midnight, leaving the air thick and still. Lisa sat in the living room, her thoughts a restless whirl. Mark had gone to bed hours ago, but she hadn't followed. She couldn't. The notebook's cryptic warnings haunted her, and the nagging weight of the email she'd received, the one now erased as if it had never existed, pressed against her mind like a vice. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 12:04 a.m. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint creaks of the old house settling. Yet underneath that, she thought she heard something. A low, rhythmic hum, almost imperceptible, coming from upstairs. Mark's study. Lisa stood, her movements slow and deliberate. She crept up the staircase, careful to avoid the spots that groaned underfoot. As she neared the study, the sound grew clearer, a faint chanting, the cadence unnatural and alien, punctuated by whispered pauses. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she peered through the crack in the study door. Mark stood in the middle of the room, his back to her. A dim, flickering glow illuminated him, casting jagged shadows across the walls. He was holding something, a small, blackened object she couldn't quite make out, and his voice, though low, carried a weight that made her skin crawl. Lisa's breath hitched. The air around her seemed heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "Protect the bridge," Mark murmured, his voice trembling. "The offering stands. Keep the path closed." He placed the object, a small oblong stone, into a wooden box on the desk. The glow faded instantly, plunging the room into darkness. Lisa backed away, her heart racing as she retreated down the stairs, her thoughts a maelstrom of confusion and fear. She made it to the living room just as Mark appeared at the top of the staircase. His face was calm, almost serene, but his eyes burned with an intensity she'd never seen before. "You're still up?" he asked, his tone light. Lisa forced a smile, clutching the edge of the couch for support. "I couldn't sleep." Mark descended the stairs slowly, his gaze never leaving her. When he reached the bottom, he walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. "I'll be leaving early tomorrow," he said, his back to her. "Another trip, same client." Lisa swallowed hard. "So soon?" "Can't be helped," he replied, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable. "Everything's in motion now." The words sent a chill down her spine. She opened her mouth to question him, but the look in his eyes silenced her. He finished his water, set the glass down, and walked past her without another word. The next morning, Lisa woke to the sound of Mark moving about the house. She found him in the foyer, a suitcase at his feet, his face calm but distant. "Take care of yourself," he said, his tone gentle but final. Lisa nodded, her mind racing with unspoken questions as he stepped out into the gray morning. When she was sure he was gone, she went to the study. The wooden box sat on the desk, slightly ajar. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing the blackened stone inside. It was warm to the touch, its surface etched with the same jagged symbol from the emails. As she stared at it, the air around her seemed to shift. A low hum filled her ears, growing louder, deeper, until it became a roar. Lisa stumbled back, dropping the box. The stone clattered to the floor, and the sound stopped abruptly. The room was silent, but the oppressive weight remained, wrapping around her like an unseen hand. She left the study, closing the door behind her. But the feeling followed her through the house, a sense of being watched, of being measured. That night she dreamt of the shrine. It stood in the center of a vast, endless void, its twisted spires reaching into an empty sky. The obelisk glowed faintly, and from its base, shadows spilled like liquid, pooling and slithering toward her. A voice whispered in her ear, low and chilling. "The bridge must hold. You are seen." Lisa woke with a start, the words echoing in her mind. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something had irrevocably changed. Somewhere far away, she imagined Mark standing before the shrine, the obelisk's glow casting long shadows behind him. And in her chest, she felt the pull, the invisible tether that bound her to the unknown, to the bridge. She was part of it now. There was no turning back.